I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I don't fully understand why. Back on the 14th of June of 2014, legendary Let's Player Chugga Conroy uploaded the first episode of his Let's Play of Xenoblade Chronicles. I was excited for it since I've watched Chugga since at least 2010, and he'd been vocal about Xenoblade being his favourite game. His Let's Play didn't disappoint, it was a masterpiece. Chugga's already an enthusiastic Let's Player whose love of games he plays is evident, but never more so than for Xenoblade. He gushes about practically every aspect of the game, and it's easy to see why. The game's gorgeous and full of fantastically designed levels, and the storytelling is phenomenal. The game feels epic in the classic sense of the word. It's a brilliant and almost flawless parable about a cycle of war and hatred that's tragic and grand, as well as being inhabited by well-realized characters who are immediately believable and lovable. It's a true classic of games, and a high watermark in both design and storytelling for the medium. But for whatever reason, I didn't leave the Let's Play that impressed with the game. I recognized everything I mentioned above, but while I loved the Let's Play, I felt no passion for the game itself, which was rare for Chugga's series, which make me passionate about games I've never played nor will play on the regular. I respected Xenoblade, but that was about it. At some point later, I got myself a new Nintendo 3DS, which happened to have a port of Xenoblade Chronicles as one of its selling points, and I decided to give it a go, thinking maybe playing the game would make me fall in love with it. It didn't. I could still recognize all of the things that clearly make the game great, but it just didn't hold my attention. I dropped the game near the halfway point at Valak Mountain twice. I've since actually finished the game. After playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I picked up the definitive edition of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and actually completed it 100% with all the side quests, all the collectibles, all the achievements, etc. But my opinion never really changed, despite giving the game as much of a chance as I possibly could. I respect the hell out of that game, and I recommend it to just about anyone really, but I'm just not super passionate about it personally. Fast forward half a decade and it's the 18th of November of 2020, and Chugga posts the first episode of his Let's Play of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The game looks pretty good, but it's full of cutscenes with janky writing. The combat makes an awful first impression, and while Chugga assures the audience it gets good eventually, for the first 10 or so episodes it looks incredibly boring to play, not to mention watch. The voice acting is janky as fuck and often doesn't match up to the animation on screen, which is especially insulting after Xenoblade Chronicle 1's legendarily outstanding dub. The storyline is boring, starting off with a far-off MacGuffin objective before descending into what feels like an endless series of pointless distractions. I frankly don't enjoy this Let's Play. Chugga does a great job and stays funny, engaging and informative, but the game frankly looks bad and isn't fun to watch, and I don't understand how he stays so positive about it. It bores me to tears. I just don't care enough about this game's lineage to stick with it, and I quit watching about 20 episodes in, right as Chugga is doing what feels like endless side quests on Raya, at a point where the main story got zero momentum. I don't know why I wind up buying this game that I think looks crap while it's on sale, but I do. I download it, it sits on my Switch for a year, and I forget about it until I'm bored out of my mind while I'm snowed in and decide to play it, just to not go insane. I fell in love with this freaking game very, very hard. I adore Xenoblade Chronicles 2 beyond what a couple words can express. But I do still think this is a worse game than its predecessor. Pretty much every complaint I laid out earlier is completely fair. This is not a flawless game by any means. It's janky and it's sort of slapdash and weird, and it frankly feels off in a lot of ways. I wouldn't call it half-baked, but only because it feels like the time they could have spent refining stuff was instead spent adding more half-polished things. There's stuff here that I honestly hate, but the game as a whole just captured me in a way that not much can. I 100%ed this game too, which is a much bigger endeavour than 100%ing Xenoblade Chronicles 1, and I regret precisely 0 seconds of it. Even the time spent jumping in place for that one hellish affinity chart node. In fact, I really miss this game and I want an excuse to replay it and spend more time in Alrest. Something like, I don't know, a series for a budding YouTube channel I'm trying to get off the ground, where I go through each chapter of the game and just sort of share my thoughts. So I'm gonna do just that. I'm going to play through it again, chapter by chapter, and just write about how I feel about what's going on, and different elements of the game that work and that don't work. I am going to gush a lot here. But I'm also going to complain heaps. This is an incredibly polarized game with extremes of quality on either end, and I'm the sort of person who loves to point that out. So with that incredibly long and tedious prologue out of the way, join me as I go on a tour of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that I will call my loving critique of the game. Starting with Chapter 1, Encounters. Xenoblade Chronicles 2's own incredibly long and tedious prologue. Like game, like fan. The game's first cutscene is pretty cool. We see the protagonist, Rex, doing some salvaging underwater in this imaginative cloud sea setting. We'll get to learn more about the cloud sea later, but I already have gripes. There's a lot of emphasis in this first chapter on things that decidedly do not matter, and salvaging is chief among them. We're going to spend a long time with Rex, and I ultimately really love this character, and he is informed by being not a salvager exactly. By which I mean, central to Rex's character is growing up having to work. The exact nature of the work doesn't matter really, but this first chapter hones in on the salvaging angle to the point where the first thing we learn about this entire world is that Rex is a salvager. All this happens before even the introductory exposition dump. This really makes the story feel off as soon as salvaging stops being important after this chapter. We're being signaled that the things we should care about are things the story itself doesn't care about in the slightest. Rex salvages up a box, opens it, and finds that there's an enemy inside, which is the game's excuse for a combat tutorial, and yikes. Listen, I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2's combat system. It might actually be my single favorite aspect of the game, even above the great level design, the music, and the storytelling, which is insane in a JRPG where I mostly don't care that much about the combat systems. The reason lots of people really dislike this combat system is that it's both really poorly explained in-game, and more relevantly right now, makes an awful first impression. I'll have lots of praise to put upon it soon, but this intro fight is terrible. Your only available actions are auto attacks, i.e. standing still and doing nothing, and anchor shot, i.e. stopping your damage output to get a healing potion you don't need. It takes a long time, and it's boring, and it may as well be a cutscene because the optimal way to play this encounter is to stay perfectly still. It teaches nothing other than the incredibly easy concept of auto attacks, and it just sucks all around. This is absolute garbage. There's no reason to entrust the player with so few mechanics to start with. No wonder no one likes this game's combat at first. The first fight in the game is the worst possible experience you can have with this system. What does work about this introduction is that exposition dump I mentioned a paragraph ago. The backstory of Alrest with Elysium and the Architect feels like a fairy tale, which is good because that's what it is within the context of this world. It's a magical, fantastical story that fits right at home with the bizarre world we're being presented, and that at the same time contrasts massively with the images of Rex's daily life we're being shown on screen, which have a sense of magical mundanity to them that really gives me Studio Ghibli vibes. It's also important that it's Rex that's narrating this story to us, since his belief in it will be a driving force throughout the entire story, unlike Salvaging, and we get to see why it matters so much to him as soon as the exposition dump is done, with one of the Titans going under and Rex's comment that humanity is running out of living space, which will once again be important to the overall story once we get to know about the Empire of Morardain. This is one of the three scenes that I think really work in this first chapter. It's a short and sweet introduction to the world, leaving enough up in the air that the game is allowed to constantly introduce new things, while leaving the player feeling comfortably grounded in Alrest and doing a fantastic job of setting up Rex's character, both his idealistic and naive nature, as well as his more grounded fears like living space running out, or how he's got a little bit of a materialistic and practical side to him too, how he cares about making money even though soon enough we'll see that's not for greedy reasons. We also get to meet Gramps. Gramps rocks. I really like this big rock monster the Rex is living on. That's a cool touch, and I like Gramps. He is cool. Gramps is cool. Rex goes over to Argentum to sell his salvage and runs into this dock worker guy.
Well, mooring is 15 gold per half day.
I'll have you a gold after I sell the stuff. All right? Later.
Hey, hold on. You know I can't do credit. Does it every time, too.
Ooh boy, that voice acting. I'll get to that very, very soon. Our first look at Argentum is odd. We only really get to see the market floor, which is admittedly the most iconic part of the trade guild, but it's also possibly the least interesting, which makes a relatively poor impression of the world of Alrest. It feels cramped, and you'll be running back and forth through the same areas a lot of times during this tutorial section where Rex prepares for a big job. Even more times if you do the optional semi-tutorial side quests that open up after talking to Bana. Considering the selling point of the franchise has always been its massive wide open areas, this feels like a strange departure and is sort of worrying on first seeing it. It shouldn't be worrying, the game is just as open in Xenoblade 1 and X, but it just seems like such a bizarre choice not to wow the player like that. You don't need to drop the player off in a zone like Cormont immediately, but Xenoblade 1 started with Colony 9, a small area but one that still feels full of nook and crannies to explore and discover, and that only feels small and limited in retrospect once you've explored the likes of Bayoness Leg or Valak Mountain. Argentum also has plenty of nooks and crannies. I really love this area by the end of the game, but they're mostly on the upper floors that you're barred from going to for the moment, or hidden behind skill checks which you couldn't possibly pass at this point in the game. It's going to be all the way until a decent chunk into Chapter 2 that we get to fully explore a big area, and I don't understand why we couldn't start off in at least a bigger chunk of Argentum. Maybe Max the Courier could have been up on the flight deck or something. Eventually we get to Bana's office, where Rex gets offered the big deal I was talking about earlier. He's shown to be blinded by greed here, taking a suspicious deal without thinking twice about it and disregarding Gramps' advice, which feels like it's setting up a character flaw that he'll struggle with throughout the game. But this is the only bad decision he makes based on greed, so chalk another weird early emphasis up. Greed might not be the right word for it though, since he's sending almost all of his money back to his struggling home, which is one of the things that really ingratiated Rex to me immediately, and a really clever touch to see that he is basically greedy on behalf of others. But you get the point. He has a strong desire to get lots of money. More importantly, this is where the voice acting issues really pop up for the first time. My first impression of the voice acting in this game when I first watched that Chega Conroy Let's Play was, they can't be serious. It's goofy. It feels like they leaned into that British accent thing that made the first game so memorable in like an effort to preserve the memes or something. It just feels disconnected and bad for large chunks of it, and then rewatching this cutscene it hit me, it's not that the voice acting is bad, it's frequently actually fantastic, as we'll see later in the game, is that it feels like the actors don't know what the fuck their characters are doing. Like, it's good acting, but it's bad acting in context, because the thing that the character model on screen is doing doesn't match up at all with how the voice actor's delivering the line. Luckily, we know this is exactly what happened. Actress Skye Bennett, who plays Pyra and Mithra, confirmed that the voice actors got very little direction and insight into the cutscenes, so they were effectively delivering a lot of their lines blind based off just the script. It's super obvious in this Bana cutscene here because both Rex and Nia feel absolutely off. Like, look here.
Whoa, they look so cool.
Rex is emoting with his entire body about how cool he thinks these drivers are, but his voice actor delivers more of an under-the-breath whisper to himself type line. Or here,
Ha ha! You made the right choice.
Where Rex's entire body language screams comedic overconfidence that just doesn't mesh with the more self-aware delivery of his voice line. What's worse is that the very first impression of Nia is awful because of this. Her first line is to break out laughing at Rex's goofy overconfidence, and neither side of this equation is solved well.
child salvager. Jen, don't tell me we're going to have to hire some babysitters for this outing too.
As I just mentioned, Rex doesn't feel overconfident enough, and Nia bends over laughing from a quiet giggle. She then delivers a line with a fantastic facial expression where she's absolutely dripping with open cartoonish condescension, but Catherine Mayhew delivers her line with her usual quiet and silky smooth voice, which makes it feel like a private joke she's telling Jin rather than openly making fun of Rex, which makes sense if you're just reading the script. I could go on and on like this, but the result is that the distance really adds up and makes a lot of the cutscenes work way worse. This gets way better as the game goes on. Either the voice actors got better at understanding how cartoonish they were meant to be, or they actually got better direction as the game went on. But here at the start, it really screws with a lot of the cutscenes in a major way, and was a massive factor in my losing interest in the game originally. This may be the game's single biggest flaw for me, and that is saying a lot in a game with those tutorials. I won't bring it up too much unless something outstanding happens, just assume that the cutscenes have this awkwardness throughout, otherwise I'd be repeating myself a lot, like this is bad for a while. Before heading off to do the mission that he's been hired for, Rex has to prepare, which gives the player the chance to explore Argentum a bit, do a few tutorials, and run into the first few side quests. I'm not going to do every side quest in the game. My first playthrough was 100%, with every side quest, every rare blade, every heart-to-heart, every super boss, you name it, I did it. It's a fantastic way to play the game, even on a first playthrough, but the point of the series is to go through the game relatively quickly so that I can make shorter videos in between my massive projects. As such, I'll only be doing the side quests I either remember fondly or I feel there's something to comment on in. I did do all of these first 3 side quests though because it just feels right. It almost feels like it's meant to be a part of the tutorial. The most iconic side quest here during chapter 1 is hide and seek. You talk to these 3 kids, they hide around Argentum, and you have to go find them. It's a solidly designed tutorial side quest, with the kids hiding in locations that direct you towards interesting stuff around Argentum. One of them is up on the rafters, next to this field skill locked chest, and past a side route that leads to a treasure trove you can open, and one of them is right next to the NPC that starts off the quest Cargo Escort. It's well designed and simple, showing you a lot of the basic skills and encouraging your exploratory spirit. Cargo Escort is a bit of a worse quest. You just sort of fight a few crabbles, which I did with 0 inputs for my part because the combat system still sucks balls until chapter 2, and then you get a reward. It's sort of unmemorable and fine. There's also the side quest Better Late Than Never, which I actually really like. This Nopon has missed his guard duty shift, so you have to find him, bribe him with food, and get him his mother's necklace back from a crab that's stolen it. It's a simple quest, but you do a lot of different stuff during it. Exploration, delivering specific items, salvaging, and combat, all while reading charming and amusing dialogue. It's a microcosm of how most side quests play out in this game while making sense and keeping things enjoyable. I really like it, even if it is a very fast quest that sort of just goes by in the blink of an eye. Some tutorializing and a few really awkward cutscenes later.
Also, you might want to watch where you stand. Otherwise, when we cast off, that rope will take your leg off.
Rex is on the Maelstrom, a ship headed for the salvaging mission Bana has hired him for. The Maelstrom has great atmosphere, this quietly gliding ship with this beautiful music. It's the first real taste of the majesty that this game will spend a long time basking in, and it's a good intro. Our objective here is to talk to the people that hired us for the mission. This feels like an introduction to a crew, and I was convinced my first time through that this was going to be our main party later. Malos even gives Rex his grudging respect, which feels like the start to a semi-friendly rivalry. This is not the case, but I don't dislike that. I think it's a clever misdirect. It is weird that we put so much emphasis on Sever, though, when he disappears from this story after this point. But that's fine, really. The really outstanding thing on the Maelstrom is the cutscene with Rex and Nia in the crow's nest, which is brilliant. Nia confirms that Rex's belief in Elysium is basically belief in a fairy tale, and she presents a much more worldly and cynical view to contrast his wide-eyed idealism. But she still comes across as understanding and kind, even through all the mean-spirited sniping that's going on. It's a really good first proper look at her character, leaving a strong impression of her and leaving room for her to evolve while immediately showing off her more likable side. The music does a lot to carry the cutscene, but even without it, it really works, and a lot of these characters' interactions are going to build on this first impression for a while. The last instance of salvaging mattering at all happens, and we find ourselves on the abandoned ship. This is the first of the very few dungeon-like areas in the entire game, and it's very simple. It's mostly a straight shot with a few side distractions to get chests and one instance of having to find a key, which is contextualized in the form of fuel to open a door. It feels like a tutorial zone for semi-linear dungeon type gameplay, which is not a type of gameplay that we see in this game often at all. My guess is it's a remnant of an old vision of what the game would play like that had to be kept in for story reasons. The combat is still boring, even though we have a few more combat arts by now and we get to have Nia, Malus and Jin join us as party members. The temporary nature of Malus and Jin is really cool. Just getting to fight alongside these characters is neat, and they're very fully featured, including voice lines for lots of different actions, interactions with Malus's blade Sever, and even learning new arts on Level Up. It's neat, and it does a pretty decent job of keeping up the facade that they'll join the party full time later on. After a weird choice for a first boss in a random sea creature that doesn't matter, Rex is instructed to open the doors with Adam's seal, and we encounter Pyra's boobs, closely followed by the rest of Pyra. Look, I really like Pyra's design. I think it's very pretty and cool, and I have zero issue with the fact that she has massive tits. Some people are like that in real life too, wouldn't you know? The character designer has all the right to give her as big a pair as he wants, especially since I think it genuinely meshes well with the rest of her design. What I do have a problem with is that the game will often place the camera right in her breasts for no reason, including the very first time we see her. It's not her boobs' fault for being there, it's the camera's fault for being stuck to them at inappropriate times, like here, our first introduction to one of the game's most important characters at a moment when she's meant to be shrouded in mystery. I'm not even saying that you're not allowed to focus the camera there at all. Rex being attracted to Pyra is a big deal in this game, so there's actually even story reasons why you sometimes have the camera focus on her chest. I'm saying that there's right and wrong times to do it, and this is a wrong time. It's just weird. It throws me off during some important cutscenes, so I'll keep bringing it up. It's a recurring problem, and it makes the game worse. It's a goofy sexual element in the middle of a serious, decidedly unsexy scene. Anyway, Rex touches Pyra's sword, Jin kills him, and we wind up in Pyra's dream of Elysium, another of the highlights of this chapter. It's just a great cutscene. Pyra comes across as mysterious and sweet, the music is phenomenal, and the entire place is gorgeous. The writing doesn't really matter here that much, since the atmosphere by itself is doing an amazing job of carrying the whole thing and making it feel magical. It really works as a foundation for Rex's quest to get Pyra to Elysium. This moment just has massive gravitas to it. The only real flaw is this moment here, where Rex's voice acting is once again completely out of sync with what the character model is doing on screen.
I remember now. That bastard stabbed me. Oh man, this is bad. Everyone in the guild is in danger. No, wait. I can't do anything if I'm dead. Titan's fucked. If I wasn't dead, I'd kick that guy's ass.
Just completely different levels of energy, which is a dark mark on an otherwise phenomenal cutscene. Honestly, a good chunk of my investment in this story for the first quarter or so of the game comes from how memorable and emotional this specific place feels. It's like a dream, and it doesn't really make sense, but there's true emotional power there. After this, we just sort of have anime shit happen. Malus wants to kill everyone on board the Maelstrom, which is goofy and exaggerated, but it also really fits his character well, as we'll learn later on as we get to know him better. Rex does a scream that people meme on, and we watch characters fight in cutscenes for ages while wishing we were allowed to actually play this exciting battle on screen in this video game. This is a thing the game will do lots later too, and which I'll complain about at those points as well. We then get the blade system tutorial, and once again, it's awful. It's too much information at once in an unclear way while not getting to the core of what matters. All we really learn are about the specials and the golden thread, but it's explained way too verbosely and with way too much at once. We go from the golden thread to arts filling specials to combo paths without any time to breathe. The tutorial seems to intuit this, and it wants to stagger the specials tutorial, but it staggers it by about a total of 5 seconds. The text literally says it'll explain it later before letting you swing your sword about 1.5 times and then interrupting you to explain it. It also does something really bad. It introduces us to systems by making us use them in a way they don't usually work, since we neither have a second driver to combo with nor have to actually fill the special gauge. The game cheats it up for us. This is a bad idea. It's important to force the player to understand how your pretty complex system works. Cheating it in their favor just means they're probably not actually absorbing the avalanche of text you're throwing at them while they're meant to be learning this stuff. At the same time, blade combos are only really fun to use in the context of driver combos, which we haven't gotten a tutorial about yet despite being simpler, and which we won't be able to access until midway through Chapter 2. It's bad, folks. The tutorials in this game are bad. The hottest of takes, I know. The combat suddenly gets a lot more fun though, because we're no longer just managing driver arts. We win a fight in gameplay, but then we lose it in a cutscene, another incredibly frustrating thing the game will do for a while, and which I'll complain about in depth in a future video. We watch some more action cutscenes, which work better, because Counterattack, which is the best song in the game, is playing. Fight Me. Gramps saves us in an incredibly badass sequence, and the chapter ends. Not a great start to the game overall. There's a couple really good cutscenes and decent side quests, but a lot of it is ruined by terrible pacing, awful tutorials, awful voice acting, and really awkward writing priorities. Next time I'll pick up on Chapter 2, where the game actually opens up a bit and gets a little bit better, though we're still not at the point where it gets properly good. Do the like, comment and subscribe thing if you like this video, have stuff you want to comment, and want to see my stuff in your subscription feed. My objective is 3 trillion subscribers within the hour of this video being uploaded, and your subbing helps a lot. I think it's about 1 trillionth of that if the math checks out. Thanks for watching, and I hope I'll see you on the next one.